Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to share with you some thoughts and comments that I have with regard to one of the recent releases made by the Criterion collection during this year of 2020. And that release has been designated spine number 1055. This film is from 1978. It is from the filmmaker Claudia Weill. And it's a really fantastic work, which is called Girlfriends. Girlfriends is a work that is directed by Claudia Weill, and it is based on a story by Claudia Weill and Vicky Polan, and a screenplay from Vicky Polan, and it stars Melanie Mayron as Susan. And it is, in essence, a story about a young woman, Susan, and her friendship with another young woman, Anne, and they live in New York, and the story revolves around Susan's own attempts and endeavors and efforts to try to create a sense of self and to find out who she is and to find her way through professional related situations and stories, and trying to, in a sense, establish herself as an artist and photographer, while at the same time dealing with a lot of personal relationships, not just in terms of men that she meets and romantic relationships that she may get involved with, but also with many of the women that she knows in her life, many of the friendships that are forged, and in particular, a very important friendship that is forged between her roommate, Anne, and what happens to that friendship when Anne announces that she will get married and move out and live with her new husband, and how that relationship will affect the relationship between her and Susan, the main character of the film, and what that leads to in as far as explorations of independence, of the nature of living in the city, the nature of living alone and loneliness, and also having to deal with failure and disappointment when one is young and one is trying to make a name for oneself in a professional or artistic world, and also comparing that with experiences of one circle of friends, and when one circle of friends sees that many other people are getting married and are moving out and are having new lives with their new families, what does that do to one's own sense of identity and self? And also, how does that reflect upon one's own take on relationships and also friendships, and also a sense of what one's bearings are going forward, and a kind of future or a path forward, as it were, and what exactly that means. What does that path forward exactly mean for someone in Susan's particular situation? And this film also really goes for interesting comparisons between the life and all the results, as it were, and consequences of domestic life, i.e. the life in a state of marriage, and how that may or may not have some significant bearing on one's own independence, one's own existence, and one's own hopes and dreams as far as artistic ambition, and also balancing that with a sense of family and with a sense of a marriage type of relationship. And so I think there are a lot of different situations that are being examined in a dramatically dynamic fashion, with, of course, the stunning performance by Melanie Mayron as Susan, who is the very heart of this film. And we follow her and her adventures, if you will, and her various relationships and the people that she's encountering, and how she is trying her best to essentially make it in the city, in New York, during this time. And she is young, and she is not famous in terms of being an artist, and so there are a lot of challenges along the way in terms of how she can try to break through, but how she fails and how she falls down, but she picks herself up, and she tries to have a sense of dignity while maintaining a positive attitude about things that are occurring in her life. So in that kind of narrative sense, it is a very compelling, warm human drama with a beautiful cast of characters that form the natural arc, if you will, or emotional anchor of the film, headed, I think, or grounded very centrally by the character of Susan Weinblatt, played by Melanie Mayron, in an absolutely stunning performance. What's great, too, is that these are characters that feel very real, and they feel like they're going through struggles of young adulthood that I think are not unusual, or they are things that I think many viewers might be able to latch onto, even if one might not necessarily have the experience of, let's say, living in New York and maybe having ties with the art scene and that sort of experience that the characters in this film seem to be experiencing. Still, there is this universal sense of young adulthood, youth, dreams and ambitions, and friendships, and how friendships can change quite dramatically and quite immediately upon various other relationships, marriages that might occur, moving to another place, the notion of settling down, and what that phrase means in the context of this modern day society, and whether that has a positive take or a negative take, depending on one's point of view. And so I think these and other types of situational dramatic depictions, I think, what allow this film to be accessible on a universal level, which I think is really very brilliant. And it creates also a sense of warmth and intimacy as well. This is something that is not just accessible. This is a film that makes us want to access the world because of the joy and as I say, the lived-in emotional warmth that I think helps guide the viewers along on this journey as we're watching this film. So it's a really, I think, a lovely portrait that is also very true, it's also very honest, and it's also very earnest. And it has at its center, as I say, the great character, Melanie Mayron's performance as Susan Weinblatt. Just a great film. This is a great film, and it's touching, and it's true, and it has that sense of being emotionally honest, which I find to be always such a refreshing aspect of good cinema. So the film Girlfriends has emerged here on the Criterion Collection in this wonderful presentation. Speaking of which, this is on spine number 1055, and it's a director-approved Blu-ray, new restored 4K digital transfer, and supervised by director Claudia Weill herself and director of photography Fred Murphy, according to the back here. So it looks great, it sounds great, and it has a wonderful look too. And I think the release by Criterion is really doing a lot to preserve that sense of look and feel and atmosphere and time and presence. This is also a New York film, as well as being a human drama film, and so I think that aspect is also being captured very nicely, and we can get a feel for that really well in this Criterion presentation. But that's not all that we get with this Blu-ray, because we get a number of supplements. It's a wealth of supplements, which I'm very impressed by. So the first is a one-on-one interview with Claudia Weill, the director herself, and this is approximately 26 minutes. And according to the Criterion Collection submenu, it's indicated as being from 2019. But in any event, this is a one-on-one interview with Claudia Weill, and here she is talking in this nearly half-hour interview. A great interview, by the way. She's talking about her life and her career as a documentary filmmaker prior to her making this narrative fiction film, Girlfriends. She's also talking about her how she got into film in the first place, and how her background and her studies weren't necessarily in film studies, but they were in literature. And so she describes, I think, in really interesting detail how she turned her attention to cinema and what that meant as far as her documentary filmmaking goes, and then what led to the circumstances that led to her wanting to explore this kind of cinematic expression format. And so she talks about this. She talks about working with Vicky Pollon and the genesis of the story Girlfriends, and what the initial concepts, with an S, plural, what the concepts of Girlfriends was initially, because there were actually different stories that seemed to have been planned, but eventually it was decided by Claudia Weill to focus in on one particular story because of the genuine interest that she and the other filmmakers and crew had with regard to how the story would play out, and interest in the character that would eventually become the Susan character that we know. And so, and in this interview, she talks about, Claudia Weill does, she talks about the specific joys and challenges of working on this film, and how the film found great success, and what that led to in terms of Claudia Weill's later attempts at filmmaking. She talks briefly about her next feature film and how it was a Hollywood production. And this leads into a really, I think, a really insightful and pointed and very crucial aspect of the interview, where Claudia Weill addresses certain instances of where she experienced or where she observed during her career, let's say soon after she made Girlfriends. There were instances where she recognized the fact that there were very few female directors, and so in Hollywood, and so this led to her meeting and becoming very acquainted with and bonding with a filmmaker like Elaine May, for example. And this also leads into a discussion a little bit about the representation of female directors in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences at the time. And so this is also a very essential aspect of Claudia Weill, in the sense that we have to remember too the certain circumstances that she was facing, especially in the Hollywood phase of her career after Girlfriends, which I think is it's indicating a lot as far as what the environment was actually like for filmmakers like Claudia Weill. On the other hand, too, though, this I think these stories and these recollections and descriptions by Claudia Weill in this interview really also further point to just how wondrous and how brilliant this independent film like Girlfriends is, and just how personal and how wonderfully pure the filmmaking experience of Girlfriends seemed to be. And so I really like that sense of returning or a kind of recollection of these maybe somewhat negative experiences, but then that reminds us of just how important an experience, a filmmaking experience like Girlfriends actually was. And then from there, Claudia Weill talks about her career as in the theater and in television, and also teaching, and this leads to some really lovely and brilliant comments that she has about her own journey and her own wanting to explore other artistic avenues and modes of expression, and then how that was linked to, or how Girlfriends otherwise is part of that overall context or fabric of her professional career. So all in all, it's a wonderful interview. I'm really happy that it's here, and Claudia Weill is such a compelling speaker. She speaks with so much energy and friendliness that it's wonderful, and I could listen to her for hours. She's so compelling and so inviting, and so, as I say, warm and friendly, and so energetic. So I'm so glad that this interview is here by the Criterion Collection. Again, 26 minutes approximately, and it's from 2019. I must say, however, one minor criticism that I have about the way that the interview was put together. I have absolutely no criticism with respect to the content, and I think Claudia Weill's comments, I think, are really brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so in that sense, I think the interview itself is essential. However, if I had to say one thing, it would just be the interview format is edited in a way that it's one of these things where you have Claudia Weill captured on video, and it has along the way shots of photos that are edited in, or maybe shots of her documentaries, clips from films, etc. So that I have nothing wrong with that kind of editing montage style. It's very common in this kind of interview format, especially the interview format that's employed by the Criterion Collection. So that's fine. I think that's really great. I just wish that the editing technique that is employed in this particular interview is that kind of technique where someone is speaking and then it'll edit to a shot, maybe a close-up shot of the same person and the same face, and it'll cut maybe in mid-sentence, or maybe the person will say a sentence and it'll cut to a close-up of the person's face, and the person will say another sentence, and after that sentence is over, it'll cut back to the same person in the same place. So it cuts in per sentence, or there's an edit even mid-sentence, and it's quite frequent actually. And so I personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that kind of editing style, especially if it's a sustained interview that's 26 minutes. And so I wish that there could have been a little bit more of a restraint when it came to the editing, fast cuts into her face and back, and into her face and back, and that sort of. I wish that could have been maybe toned down a little bit, especially considering that we are spending nearly 30 minutes with Claudia Weill, and it's a great, as I say, the content is great, and so I found myself probably just wanting to listen to it rather than to watch it, because the editing was a little bit irritating. But that, I think, is a minor criticism, and it's certainly not evident in any of the other interviews that we see in the Criterion supplements for this film, Girlfriends. So, but that's just my own personal personal reaction to that minor point. But otherwise, as far as the content goes, once again, it is an essential interview with Claudia Weill. Speaking of the interviews, then we go on with a 2020 interview with the screenwriter Vicky Polan. This is 12 minutes, and this is a great one. Vicky Polan is very energetic, and she is very clear in the description of her perspective and approach to filmmaking and to screenwriting, and how she generates dialogue, the types of things or activities or exercises that she employs while she is writing in order to try to capture a sense of the real in her dialogue, and how she does it. It's amazing to hear her description of it. And she's also talking about specific scenes, about how they were generated, how she came up with the idea, what she was trying to achieve, how she was trying to avoid cliched means of expressing human drama, and how she was instead trying to go for something which she felt was more real. She gives the example of the very, I think, a great scene. She refers to it as the mashed potato scene. For those of you who know the film, you know what I'm talking about. She also talks about the genesis of the film and about how it was originally intended as far as certain sequential or short story type of shorts that were to combine in one work, but how it expanded or how it focused in on one particular story, one particular set of characters. Although one can say also that the spirit, if you will, of the original concepts of the other stories, I think, are present, at least as they are being described by Vicky Polan here and also Claudia Weill in the earlier interview. So there is a sense of consistency and a sense of linkage with initial ideas. So there's an organic sense of growth and evolution of what eventually became the film Girlfriends. And so this is a great interview, and I like the way it's edited. I like the way it's shot. It's very composed, and it's very much focusing in on Vicky Polan and what it is she's trying to express. So great stuff. So this is the interview that's approximately 12 minutes. And then we have another supplement, which is from 2020. This is approximately 16 minutes. This is called Girlfriends, A Look Back. This is what I understand is a Zoom conference with 4 participants. So first is Claudia Weill, and then Melanie Mayron, and then Christopher Guest, and then Bob Balaban. And so the 3 actors and then the 1 director, they are talking in this 4-participant Zoom conference. And I think it's presented well. There are no online hiccups or anything of that sort, so it's very smooth. The conversation is presented very smoothly, and it's very warm and engaging. I think we have some great comments from, say, Claudia Weill about her inspirations, her film inspirations. There are some mentions of Godard, which is really great to hear. We also hear some comments from the actress Christopher Guest about how what was the inspiration for Christopher Guest's character and how he approached the character, because it's a really interesting approach to that type of character. So it's great to hear that. We also get a little anecdote about how he was cast, which is interesting. Bob Balaban also gives some great comments, because he plays a very important role, the husband character. And so he has some really lovely and complimentary words to say about the actor Anita Skinner, right, who played Anne. And they played husband and wife in the film. Again, a very important component of the film. So Bob Balaban speaks about that and other really lovely anecdotes. And then we have Melanie Mayron, who is, it's so great to hear her and to see her and to get her perspective on this quite brilliantly achieved, iconic character presence, her character Susan Weinblatt, and to see the the circumstances of her role and how she worked with the role, and what she felt immediately after the film, and the type of real genuine success and popularity that this film generated. So all in all, this is another great supplement. Again, it's a Zoom conference, and so given this time of 2020 with the current world health crisis, these types of supplements, participants joining remotely on Zoom or something like that, is probably going to be a new type of normal when it comes to supplements going forward. But even so, I think there's nothing wrong with the format, and especially with something like this, where you have 4 participants who are really enjoying the conversation, and who seem to be having a good time, and they are all participating with great commentary and some great anecdotes. So this is a really good conversation between or among these participants, called Girlfriends, A Look Back. But that's not all, because then we get another Criterion Zoom conversation this time between Claudia Weill and Joey Soloway. And this is from 2020, 22 minutes. And this is remote, so we can probably understand why this was done this way, because of the current world health crisis. Be that as it may, the content of this conversation, dialogue, or interview focusing on Claudia Weill is really lovely. It is absolutely lovely for a number of reasons. First, Joey Soloway has such great admiration and affection for Claudia Weill, and you can really sense this, and I admire that so much, because what that does so well also is it places the emphasis and focus on Claudia Weill and her work, and also the significance of Girlfriends, how it was a popular film, and how Claudia Weill reacted to such popularity. What were some of her inspirations for wanting to make this film in the first place? What were some of her cinematic inspirations? She speaks again a little bit about Jean-Luc Godard, which is very fascinating. She also has an opportunity to talk about the notion of auteur, and Claudia Weill has some really thought-provoking comments about what she thinks of the concept of auteurs in cinema. And then she goes on to speak a little bit about how much she thinks the film is really about her, or maybe it's not about her, but she's using elements that she understands from her own life and turning it into a narrative fiction story. But she's also talking about the ways in which limitations lead to creative options, and also she's talking about the success, and also there are some rather harsh truths or harsh circumstances that are also alluded to, as far as even though Girlfriends found a great deal of success, it still didn't lead necessarily, at least in the way that this discussion is describing it, it didn't lead necessarily to the kind of long filmography director career that is critically lauded periodically, like other directors that are often mentioned in terms of great film directors from 20th century American cinema and the like. And so Claudia Weill and Joey Soloway refer to this kind of situation, and this leads into another, I think, important discussion, a little bit anyway, about the nature of the filmmaking industry, the professional filmmaking industry, and the Hollywood machine, and how her experiences with her second film, the Hollywood production, maybe made her realize just how difficult it was to be a successful filmmaker, a female filmmaker, in Hollywood during this time. And so I think there are some really insightful and important observations that are made by Claudia Weill in this respect. And then ultimately the conversation does turn back to a focus on just the importance of this film, how this film has such a universal appeal. It is a film, it's called Girlfriends. Its main characters are women, and it is, in, I think, a primary way, a film that is focusing on the relationships between and among women in a lovely and a warm way. But one of the interesting details I think emerges in these supplements is just how much of a universal appeal this film has. It has a reach that reaches a female audience. It also reaches male audiences. It reaches, seems to reach audiences of varying age groups. And so I really like that detail. I really do, because what it does is it really suggests that, of course, there is this importance that is placed in terms of the focus of the film, the fact that the film it has a main character that would otherwise, in any other type of maybe a Hollywood film, this main character, Susan, would be the secondary friend role. But here she is given front and center attention as the main character. And not only that, it is a film that is dealing with as I say, relationships between and among women, but there is this universal sense to it, and I really admire how this discussion alludes to that fact, while still maintaining a sense of truth and honesty and earnestness about the experience of Susan and people like Susan. So a great way of describing it, and so I like how the conversation leads in that direction. So another great supplement from the Criterion collection here, 22-minute discussion between Claudia Weill and Joey Soloway. But that's not all, because then we get a 1978 TV interview, City Lights on Location, Canadian TV, and this is approximately 19 minutes. This is interesting because it's a TV interview, 1978, with Melanie Mayron and Claudia Weill, and it's a really great interview. It goes into much detail. There are some, I think, really nicely pointed questions that are very respectful of Claudia Weill, and are really also dealing with, or also addressing, certain issues of some of the difficulties of making films during this time, in this atmosphere and environment, but also at the same time really pointing to great aspects of Claudia Weill's career as a documentary artist, as well as her plans for future films going forward, again, during this time of 1978. Also, it gives us opportunity to hear Claudia Weill's take on other filmmakers. She expresses admiration, again, for Godard in this interview. She also talks about Francis Ford Coppola and gives examples of, say, films like The Godfather as examples of why she really admires the cinematic work of Coppola, and other really interesting comments like that. And then Melanie Mayron, too, she's talking about the role. There's a really lovely and humorous anecdote about Melanie Mayron working with Claudia Weill for the first time. And Claudia Weill wasn't used to necessarily making narrative films, because her background was in documentary films. And so there's a really funny and charming anecdote that Melanie Mayron gives about Claudia Weill's first day of shooting, and so check that out if you can. And so this is, I think, a really great interview, and the interviewer has a great knowledge of Claudia Weill's career, and there are some very honest questions that are asked about the film industry and about the success of this film and the like. So that's a great interview to have. It's also interesting to point out that this interview, it looks like it's not referred to on the back of the Criterion Blu-ray. So this might have been so that's interesting. So just in case you're interested, so that is the City Lights 1978 interview with Melanie Mayron and Claudia Weill. But that's not all, because we still get more wonderful stuff. So what we get next is a documentary, a 1971 documentary, which is called Joyce at 34. And Joyce here refers to Joyce Chopra. And this is a documentary, 27 minutes. It's credited to Claudia Weill and Joyce Chopra. And it is a fascinating focus on Joyce Chopra and her experiences as being a new a mother after having given birth to her child, her daughter. We see her and we hear her comments about motherhood just prior to her giving birth, and then we see her focus in on being a mother and caring for and loving her newborn daughter. And we see comments also with her husband, and also we see her husband, Tom Cole, and we also see this interesting perspective, if you will, on the idea or notion of motherhood, and how Joyce Chopra would like to still pursue her career and her professional interests as a filmmaker and artist, while still balancing her responsibilities as a mother. And she loves her daughter. It's very obvious from this documentary that she is a very loving mother, but she's also very much conscious of her own desire to fulfill her hopes as a professional artist. And so we see this, I think, complex situation play itself out, and also described by Joyce Chopra herself in her many talks to us, the viewer. And when along the way we see Joyce Chopra trying to get back to work, as it were, and we see her parents, and we get to hear a little bit about a little bit from her mother. We hear Joyce Chopra's comments about her parents and about her mother in particular, and especially how her own role as being a mother now may be helping her to see her view of her mother growing up, especially in the context of liberation and independence. And these discussions are also referred to quite directly in this film. The idea of motherhood, the idea of independence, the idea of being an independent professional artist while being a mother, and what does it mean, therefore, to be able to try to balance those things? What does it mean to balance? What does that concept inherently mean, and the like? And so this is a fascinating documentary that I think in those aspects have really close ties, not just with the film Girlfriends, but also with Claudia Weill as a filmmaker, and also her concerns as a filmmaker as well. So this is really great to have. Then that's not all, because we have another documentary called Commuters, and this is described as being from 1970, and Claudia Weill and Elliot Noyes provide us with this approximately 3-minute work that is focusing in on commuters going to and returning, leaving and returning to a particular suburb. It's described as being a New York suburb, and so we see trains, people getting on trains, waiting on platforms, getting out of cars, getting back into cars, and we see this individual experience along the way. And this reminds us, of course, above all else, that Claudia Weill is a documentary filmmaker in terms of what she did prior to making Girlfriends. So this is a great example of that, called Commuters. But that is not all, because we get, with this splendid release, which is right here, the Blu-ray front and back, we get the booklet, and I've already taken the liberty to take the booklet out. It's a stapled booklet, and I am so happy about this. And as you know, I'm a big fan of the stapled booklets. And the reason why I am so is because these tend to provide many pages, or the potential for many pages. And if that's the case, this can also provide, therefore, the potential for a lot of writings. And so in this case, we have not one, but two essays. So I'm so happy about this, and they are both excellent. The first is by Molly Haskell, and it's called Second Births. And the second essay is called Fantastic Light by Carol Gilligan. And the first essay, Second Births, is focusing on Claudia Weill and her career and her background in education and her professional career up to girlfriends and post-girlfriends. And so this is, as I say, very much an understanding and appreciation of the background of Claudia Weill is, I think, really essential, and it helps to further give insight and appreciation in a viewing of the film Girlfriend. So this essay is great to have. The second essay is a focus more on the film itself and the certain themes and thematic concerns, character decisions, character arcs, and specific scenes that I think point to the examples of these character arcs and developments. So again, a great set of essays. The first essay focusing in on Claudia Weill, the filmmaker. The second essay focusing in on the film Girlfriends that was made by Claudia Weill. So a great combination of essays. Two essays in a booklet, which is stapled. Wonderful stuff with photos to match. So I'm loving this so much already. So highly recommended if you can to check out those essays, and then to get the Blu-ray as well, which has this great booklet. So this is the Criterion release of Girlfriends, and so overall I'm really happy about this release. It's a great film, and it's a great Criterion release. So there are maybe a couple places where maybe the Criterion release could have been maybe a little bit more rounded. I would point again to the fact that there isn't any commentary track that is included. So I'm, generally speaking, a big fan of commentary tracks, and so I would have loved to have had one here. But at the same time, I think we get the essays that cover really great ground. We also get the supplements that cover really great ground. So the combination of these elements, I think, provide a lot of detail and a lot of discussion that would have been found on a commentary track anyway. So in that way, the fact that there isn't any commentary track could be seen to be okay. The other thing, I don't know, these are just, again, very minor details. The presentation, I think, is really great, but the inside is interesting in that, as you may know, the booklet would go in like this, and it would be housed like so, and then the disc is figured in like so. But the inside of the case doesn't have any artwork, which is a little bit, I don't know, there's a kind of lonely feeling I get. It's just this gray thing. Oftentimes you'll get Criterion discs that'll have artwork that is, the outside cover, etc. And then something might happen on the inside to carry on with that kind of design choice aesthetic. But here there doesn't seem to be any. Or my understanding is I don't think the gray here is meant necessarily to be an extension of the aesthetic of the overall design package. I could be wrong, but in any event, it would have been nice perhaps to see some kind of design artwork continue on into the inner part of the Blu-ray casing. But I think that's a very minor criticism. Also, let me just say again that the Claudia Weill one-on-one interview is great. Just maybe a little bit less of the editing that I was referring to earlier, I think would have made it really, really stand out and stellar. But the content and the comments of Claudia Weill are themselves standout and stellar. So it's worth checking out and listening to because of Claudia Weill's excellent comments in that interview. So with that, my friends, this is the film Girlfriends at spine number 1055 from the filmmaker Claudia Weill. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I really appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.